Welcome everyone to This is the Place, Place, Identity, and Community in North Carolina Poetry, hosted by North Carolina Humanities. Welcome, and we are so looking forward to this evening's event. We will begin shortly. Okay, again, for those just joining, welcome to This is the Place, Place, Identity, and Community in North Carolina Poetry, hosted by North Carolina Humanities. We're going to give everyone just another minute or so to join, and then we will begin this evening's program. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for an evening of poetry in celebration of National Poetry Month. I am Melissa Giblin, Programs Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to be speaking to you all today from Charlotte, North Carolina. And welcome to all of those joining us from North Carolina and points beyond. At North Carolina Humanities, we aim to bring North Carolinians together to have shared experiences around the humanities and dialogue amongst themselves to create understanding and deeper human connections that can strengthen our statewide community. Traditionally, North Carolina Humanities provides connection through in-person events, but during this pandemic, we are shifting to provide opportunities and resources for connection virtually through programs such as this. I'm waving to you all from a distance and will again say just how pleased we are to have you here with us. North Carolina Humanities is pleased to present This is the Place, Place, Identity, and Community in North Carolina Poetry. Poetry creates space where we can discover ourselves, find our place, and also find connection with one another. Looking at current events, we believe that understanding and connection are needed now more than ever. After listening to this evening's poems and to the moderated conversation, we hope that you all will consider the role of poetry in connecting us. As a last reminder, you can learn more about North Carolina Humanities and our programs by visiting our website at www.nchumanities.org. North Carolina Center for the Book, an affiliate of the National Center for the Book in the Library of Congress, and is made possible with support from the State Library of North Carolina and is a program of NC Humanities. North Carolina Humanities is a statewide nonprofit and affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Please note that any views, findings, conclusions, opinions, or recommendations expressed by our partners and participants do not necessarily represent those of NC Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. For housekeeping, today's webinar is being recorded. We'd love to hear from you during today's event. If you have a question, please send it through the Q&A tab or through the chat and we will get to those at the conclusion of the program. Thanks again for joining us, and it is my pleasure to introduce North Carolina Poet Laureate Jaki Shelton Green, Carrboro Poet Laureate Fred Joyner, and Chapel Hill Poet Laureate CJ Suitt. This evening's moderator is North Carolina Humanities Board Trustee and Appalachian State University Director of Jazz Studies, Todd Wright. Todd, I will turn the event over to you to begin this evening's poetry showcase.
Thank you, Melissa, and it's great to be with all of you this evening. I'm going to jump right into introducing our first poet. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you CJ Suitt to read his poems.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really an honor to share this space with my fellow laureates. And I'm just honored to also be the first poet laureate of Chapel Hill, and really, really excited to continue that work of remembering those who have come before me, folks like George Moses Horton and Polly Murray, and tons of folks who have walked in Chapel Hill and cut their teeth in this town. So I'll jump right into poems. And as my auntie always says, I want to make you happy twice. Happy to hear me start, and then happy to hear me finish up. So we'll jump right into some poems here. On this day, I say a little prayer for the world, that we might recognize our power, our ability to shape our own destiny with love on our side. 34 years and some moons ago, I lie in a nursery, not knowing all my life would bring, that I would build a world with words. I come from a faith tradition that says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I'm reminded of the last conversations I had with my older cousin Nate, who passed. He said, God spoke a metaphor so powerful, it got up and walked around, became life. How could I not be a poet? One voice listening with two ears, bringing presence like three wise men, speaking metaphors, tapping into 5 generations, listening at the feet of my elders, dropping gems like clumsy jewelers. I was picking it all up. People who made something out of nothing, spoke life in the face of death, chose to do what was right when there was little left, made a consumption and host a function, feed the whole neighborhood out of a few fishes and loaves, heat pumping out a pot-belly stove, staring at a forest they chose to make a road, a way out of no way, me, a black baby, a miracle embodied in this body. My body can see and be seen. Hard, masculine, my body can reach when there is nothing to reach for, can heal itself, can move through and through, be both sound and silence, thunder and lightning. My body needs touch, needs warmth and good company, needs to be reminded it matters. This body needs to dance until my cool comes off, needs to sweat, bump and grind and freestyle and freestyle and freestyle and freestyle. My body needs to work through some shit like shame and ancestral trauma. My body needs silence and space to think and digest. Process, it can be processed. My body needs boundaries. It can be a boundary. My body is afraid, gets lonely, feels alone a lot more than I like to admit. Is bad at keeping in touch, is good at being present. My body likes to share, but wants to have first or last. My body hates Mondays and mosquitoes. My body is learning to love itself back into wholeness, how to relate to its masculinity in a way that feels right or healthy. My body looks healthy. My body is a journey and a destination, a thing I'm learning to be present in, to lean into. My body is a collection of crescent moons wrapped in lunar eclipse skin. My body is whole and full, is queer and still questioning. My body is healing, is free, and trying to stay that way. It is not perfect, and it is working on it. So I'll read 2 more poems and then I'm gonna get out the way. This poem is in response to a lot of the things that happened at the Capitol recently. I was just kind of ruminating on all the things that happened. And I was watching a Star Trek episode called Homeward, and I'm kind of a nerd. I love Star Trek. And And it was just really about place. And these are some reflections from that. I think it's like season 7, episode 13. That's how much of a deep cut it is for all my Star Trek fans. It's called Homeward. Can I live knowing what I know and not share it? Or share it and be thought a madman? Knowledge can be so heavy. The bricks of 1,000 libraries on my back, I write tracks to train vision, set in motion a mission, to be and behold, to see and be seen, and listen for the ways that I can help. What do you do when your world goes? The truth you knew grows into a lie, the ivy covering your eyes, a beautiful sculpture, yet haunting shape to live inside. The ancestral memory clicks. What must it have been like to survive the hull of a ship, placed on plantation and told you are no longer allowed to choose, to know the truth you knew could be of use, but the world only offers a noose. If that story is spoken too loud in the wrong language, the colonizer, a manipulative savior, the flicker of present memory that ain't really my business, the mind of a proud boy willing to die for the image of a country that never was, that is currently dying, sacrifice all that he holds sacred for the sake of statement. Don't tread on me. Funny how a white rabbit can become a snake, how a cross becomes an eagle, a Bible, a constitution, and we are all stuck in some ideology or another, willing to kill ourselves over beliefs. Some deaths are slow. Others on the other side of a barrel, aged in molasses, soaked indignance. How will we survive when all we have known is gone? There is more to life than ritual sacrifice. You cannot come clean on a soapbox. How can I be humbled by others? Experience without being shamed out of existence. I want to live a fantastic story where I learn to be wrong, to grow into newness, without the threads of my history hanging in tatters. The last poem I'm going to share with you is a poem that I wrote during the pandemic last year that there's a video available for, and so you can like look it up and hear it more later if you want to hear it again, or some of you may have already heard it. But I felt the need to not only just be present with the like stillness of the world or the social distance, the nature of the world, but also vision, as we artists do so often, envision what the future might be like. So how do we bring forward those things that have kept us up until this point, while also visioning what the future might look like? And so I wrote this poem, and I'll leave you all with this. In the aftermath, I'm sure I'll feel like a tourist, passing through my own life. I'll add up my subtractions, stand in the great divide, multiplying the things I have left. In the aftermath of all this, I'll sing with you in a choir stand, on street corners, and at my favorite karaoke night, I'll stroll aimlessly around the mall, even though I hated the mall. We'll brush shoulders and walk down the same aisles. I'll make you a meal. I'll never leave the party early without a really good excuse, and we'll dance. Bump and grind, spin and dip. I'll give you a spoonful of my ice cream. I'll let you try my beer. A fork full of my favorite dessert. We'll pass homemade dishes around a full potluck dinner table. We'll have hugs so close and tight the world will burst into giggles. I'll hold my friends' children, kiss the foreheads of my nieces and nephews. You won't have to look for the smile in my eyes above my mask. We'll get a window seat. As we watch friends and lovers gather on lawns and in courtyards, I'll remember the things that brought me strength. The ways I gave and was given to, how I learned to pause and breathe in the day, how I made a feast of my feelings and served it up poem after poem, seeing myself both seed and tree. The world will see me in full color, Black and American, a resilient ancestry. Will hold our leaders and officers accountable. We won't be so well adjusted to injustice, and we will allow suffering to speak. We'll get to work and heal together. In the aftermath, I'll reach into my pocket for a letter from my past self that reads, I will be here for you. Yes, always and forever. even when the world stops and the cards have all folded and you are in between the lines. Thank y'all so much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, CJ. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Fred Joyner to read his poetry selections. Fred.
Okay, good evening. Thank you to everybody and anybody who had anything to do with this reading. I'm thankful. Just by way of clearing the space, I'm gonna open with a poem by one of my patron saints, poets, Miss Lucille Clifton. And it was what kind of I started ruminating on when we figured out what this panel would be called. Yeah, so it's from this collection, How to Carry Water, edited by Araceli Germay, an awesome poet in her own right. And the name of the poem is Why Some People Be Mad at Me Sometimes. They ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories. And I keep on remembering mine. It's a short poem. Miss Lucille was known for that. They asked her one time, why do you write so simple? And she said, not simple, clear. And I think that was a really good distinction. Us poets sometimes have to be clear about what our work is and is not doing. I'm gonna read a poem, again, in thinking about space and place and community. Washington, DC is a city that kind of raised me in a way. And so this is a poem about Washington, DC, and kind of like the changes I see coming there, extremities. It's called Extremities. This city used to mean us, signify a skin, streets filled with blood and bloods meant us. We used to think of our city as a heart, the center of things. The point was to go and come. We still like to think of it as a heart, not a foot or a fist formed against us. Not avenues, but arteries and veins. Not highways, but capillaries that lead us to townships of blood. Extremities. We, honest hands and feet, digits doing the hard work, the hard and dirty work of the unthanked. We carry a message. I am still here. The tingle down the arm of the city means the city's body is speaking. What happens when blood cannot return home? What of the pound of flesh that pumps ignorant to its members, knowing nothing of commerce, of gentrifying blocks, of the body's displacement or the silencing of loud memories? We loud as we want to be in our house. Our handshakes are explosions, celebration, perhaps thanks for surviving the bullet and the bulldozer, a city shedding its skin. Our noise says we still here, or we ain't going nowhere. Our colors are an imprint. Even in our absence, we afterglow. The unexplained numb and side streets smolder at the fingertips said our blood, our sound is still needed there. I'm going to try to read this poem. So this is a poem just jumping from place to place. Lived in Mali, Bamako, Mali, West Africa for 3 years, right before I moved to Chapel Hill. And it started me thinking about two things. It started me thinking about money because I saw the power of the US dollar And then I also thought about this whole concept of terra nullius, which literally translates in Latin to like no man's land, like nothing land. And so I'm going to read two quick poems, and then I think I'm going to close if depending on what's going on with my time here. Consumed. This is experience when I first moved to Mali. My wife says to me, "Hey, throw your trash away at night." And I was like, "Why?" And this poem is why. Consumed. I am losing weight. My mouth is shrinking. My stomach is now right-sized for my eyes. I've seen where everything goes to die. Things the earth cannot swallow, cannot return to dust. Litter is landscape, and only the unusable burns. When I take out the garbage, I feel shame. My oversized trash bags say greed, say own. Before nightfall, what I thought waste will be in someone's home or stomach. In the morning, I will stare at my refrigerator and ponder its rotten swell. This one's called Terra Nullius. Yeah. We are told we come from dust. They say we come from God's breath, blood and soil, that we are to be carried wherever we are cargoed, wherever we are sent, to be swept aside, to make no mistake, and make no mistake, dust is not soil or good earth. Their feet mark our bodies, their storied bodies mark ours, our saltwater births and deaths. Even our tongues make a blinding streak across our memory, a blind spot in time. To be rendered nothing, invisible, and yet still bear Kipling's new caught burden. Even new empires' mouths say corruption, but means nothing, void, savage. Coda. Even after Ellison, after all the other invisible ones have taught me, it is here between the Sahara's dusty kiss and the Sahel's indecision that I learn how to live in no man's land, how to be both earth and nobody, soil and dust. Cool. So I'm gonna read a poem. I think this is my last poem. How much time do I have?
You've got time for this one.
Okay, cool. So this is a poem. So my people on both sides of my family come from Georgia and South Carolina, coastal South Carolina, low country people on my mom's side, and low country people, Savannah, Georgia on my father's side, and Southwest Georgia, like Plains. And so as I started to discover myself and discover who I am and my roots, I learned about the Gullah communities on the islands off the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, even North Carolina a little bit. And so this poem is called Gullah. When I think of you, I think of all the questions on my plate, of the okra, tomatoes, and corn, all gone. I sift through the last scattered grains of rice for answers, like the last words of a saltwater prayer. I think of the distance between the blood-darkened Atlantic. I think of the fictitious distance the blood-darkened Atlantic put between our tongues and bodies. Massa still means bondage, burden. Gumbo still means okra. How long before your body's story is bleached like the shells and tabby at the point? or before every acre of my legacy is subdivided for empire's mansions. I still dream of all the history sold at the market, of the mirror in the waters, of the Gold Coast, of the crumbling schoolhouse in the palm of my grandfather's hands. Thank you.
And thank you, Fred. So let's move on to Jaki Shelton Green. It's my pleasure to introduce Jaki Shelton Green to read her poetry selections.
Thank you very much, Todd, and thank you, CJ and Fred, for the energy that you have really harnessed and harvested inside of this space, talking about what it means to think about how our work is informed by this geography of North Carolina. The first poem I'm going to read is "Who Will Be the Messenger of This Land?" And I'll discuss a little bit later in Todd's questions on why these poems. Who will be the messenger of this land? Count its veins, speak through the veins, translate the language of water, navigate the hills of lineage. Who will carry this land in parcels, paper, linen, burlap? Who will weep when it bleeds, hardens, forgets to birth itself? Who will be the messenger of this land, wrapping its stories carefully in patois of Creole, Irish, Gullah, Twi, Tuscarora, stripping its trees for tea and pleasure? Who will help this land to remember its birthdays, baptisms, weddings, funerals, its rituals, denials, disappointments, and sacrifices? Who will be the messengers of this land, harvesting its truths, bearing unleavened bread, burying mutilated crops beneath its breast? Who will remember to unbury the unborn seeds that arrived in captivity, shackled, folded, bent, layered in its bowels? We are their messengers, with singing hoes and dancing plows, with fingers that snap beans, arms that raise corn, feet that cover the dew falling from okra, beans, tomatoes. We are these messengers, whose ears alone choose which spices, whose eyes alone name basil, nutmeg, fennel, ginger, cardamom, sassafras, whose tongues alone carry hemlock, bloodroot, valerian, damiana, St. John's wort. These roots that contain its pleasures, its languages, its secrets. We are the messengers, new messengers, arriving as mutations of ourselves. We are these messengers, blue breath, red hands, singing a tree into dance. The second poem, Segregated Rainbows, is from a collection of memoir about family members who could move through the dark of the night and pass white into whiteness. Segregated Rainbows, 1. 1932, somewhere over the South Carolina border, a yellow dress becomes canvas, witness to colorless dreams that appear beneath my grandmother's smile. Standing together under protective, moonless, starless sky, blonde and black hair touching, daring the air, daring oceans between them. My grandparents clasp hands, stare into the invisible lens of an invisible camera. They stare straight ahead into an erect future. Cross burnings, slashed tires, backyard clotheslines torched, dead cats hurled through windows. 2. 1953, I am born, granddaughter, the color of coral, ripened peaches, brown hair that rolls up into little rivers. I enter this world carrying grandmother's birthmark, the same arrow pointing east inside her left thigh. I grow my father's smile when I cry. I grow the graystone wolf eyes of grandfather. When I am 7, my tears teach me grandfather's language. 3. I grow into the arrow inside my left thigh. I grow hair, breast for the wind's daughter. I grow hips, teeth for the moon's wife. 4. I become the yellow dress, patched, bloodstained, hidden. I become the ground somewhere over the South Carolina border, receiving their dance, their prayer. I become blonde, black hair bleeding together. I become their hands, loving in and out of season. I become their land, fertilized by miscarried, aborted ashes. I am the life they could not birth, they could not name, nor could they call home. 5. My grandmother teaches me other languages: archery, piano, ballet, seduction, rivalry. My mother teaches me to be her, not become the arrow inside my left thigh. She demands that I cease walking, talking with wolves. 6. Grandfather's obituary did not mention my grandmother as his wife, my mother as his daughter, my uncle as his son. The wrinkled, worn news clipping chronicles and keeps the evidence of your memories. The smell of antique leather, expensive cigars, expensive smiles, collections of leather-bound books, photo albums, bank portfolios. New jazz brews inside of you like chocolate wrapping licorice sticks. 8. I am the crying wolf, warrior without tribe. My inkwell spills dust-coated ink meant for a hidden canvas, moth-eaten, evicting shadows of another likeness, another moth-eaten revenge. 8. I become sword of the grandfather. I become another trophy, memory, Persian rooms, satin afternoons, tea biscuits, polite assassinations, sexual innuendos, piano recitals, lullabies, and proper cheers. I am the granddaughter, witness to the incest of rain and snow, witness this betrayal of rainbows. 9. We bury yellow dresses, deeds, birth certificates. We bury swords, teeth, segregated deaths. We bury questions, reprisals, birthrights. 10. Every morning, a wolf visits my yard, and I remember to feed him. I'm going to end with a piece that I wrote in response to a lynching of my great uncle. Let me get it right. My great uncle. So my great grandfather, Caswell Holt, and his brother were Black emancipation sheriffs in Alamance County after slavery. The story is, this is documented in history. The story is they arrested a white woman for public drunkenness downtown Burlington. That evening, they were dragged out of their homes and they were lynched. My great uncle died. My great grandfather did not die because Black people were able to get to his body and hide it and nurse him back to health. We know that he lived because there is documentation and public record, that he actually testified at an anti-Klan activity rally on Capitol Hill in the 1800s. And I've been to this space many, many times. And my question has been, what does it mean when we ask the ecosystem around us to speak about what it has witnessed? We know it happens to humanity inside of a lynching. But I wanted to ask the trees. I wanted to ask the trees. I wanted to ask the trees. Do you remember? Were you there? Did you shudder? Did your skin cry out against the skin of my great uncle's skin? Was the smell of bark a different smell from the smell of meat flesh, human meat flesh? Beloved father, husband, lover, friend, man flesh. Could the air discern burning tongue from burning arm? Does the neck bone stay intact or grizzle like the shaft of toes, fingers, ears? I wanted to ask the trees. Were you there? Did you shudder? Are you an elder that wailed out loud when they strung him up on your youngest branch? No mercy even for the lynching of new sprawling birch limbs, just learning themselves how to crawl towards an unemancipated sky. Are you a grandchild or great-grandchild of the tree that drank his blood? The tree that cried tears into the rope around his neck, his arms, his legs. I wanted to ask the trees, but the ground spoke first. Annoying, perfectly manicured azaleas, annoying, perfect graves of perfect skeletons, whose bloodstained hands are forever etched in the hearts of my ancestors who cry out to me. Plantation ground scratches the soles of my feet. Ancestors beg me to lie down, be still. They waited so long for this day when someone would come and dance with their spirits. They are everywhere whispering, holding up this house that dares to ignore them, holding up a sanitized history and herstory, one for the trees, one for us. I wanted to ask the trees, do you remember? Did you refuse to hold his weight? Did your branches crackle? Did you refuse to hold him? Did you feed his blood to your roots? Who are these new trees? Look how they glisten against an unshackled firmament. Did you tell them that his blood was the only nourishment you could provide that entire season? Did you tell them it was a winter of blood? No rain, no snow, blood storms, lightning and thunder lifting other names unto the wind's tongue. So many names for the wind to carry. So much hair, teeth, bones for the ground to gather. I wanted to ask the trees, who will carry your stories? Who are your historians? Who will measure the rings of ropes that wrapped around your waist, your shoulders, under your arms, beneath your head? I wanted to ask the trees, did you forget to breathe when the red thunder inside you painted everything the color of love? I want to ask the trees, do you remember? Do your branches still crackle with his weight? Do you shudder? Do you know mercy? Thank you.
And thank you, Jaki. All these poems are poignant, but that one almost deserves a moment of silence after it. Now for some questions and conversation. The poems you read this evening were influenced in some ways by elements of region, place, and the natural world. How does North Carolina's sense of place influence and shape your writings? CJ, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a blessing to be born in North Carolina. I've been here, traveled across the country, and come back here. And in my learning about the place and my upbringing in the place, like you find that North Carolina is this mid range between the North and the South. And during the Civil Rights Movement, I learned that many people used to like North Carolina was the like resting place for people on their way to the movements in the South and on their way up towards the North in a lot of places. And I think I feel that a lot in being in Chapel Hill and having done a lot of work here. And I think also being from Chapel Hill, which is often thought of as a wealthy college town, but being born and raised here, and in the first like 5 to 7 years of my life, like not having running water in my house and dealing with that reality and having relatives who lived in more rural parts of the state thinking that we were wealthy because we lived in Chapel Hill while we were still like living in a trailer. And I'll never forget Hurricane Fran came through in 97 and literally picked up the little house we lived in and like turned it like this much. And that was when my parents like bought a trailer when I was younger. And so I think a lot of what I bring as a poet, as an artist is comes from being from a place that I felt like didn't always see me as a part of its story. And having lots of relatives and family members who I think that this place still struggles to see or render visible as it makes laws, as it decides like who gets a newspaper and who gets recycling pickup and who gets all these sort of little things that invite people into a process of shaping the place that they're from. And so poetry was kind of my radical way of being like, of interjecting or injecting my own story into the dialogue that was happening around what this place is. And now in this position, also determining in some ways what it can be. And so, yeah, I think that's just a start. I mean, that's a very big question. I think I could go on for a while, but I feel like that's a piece of what it means for me. And I think there's also a major giant literary community here. And so I really feel held by my elders and ancestors and also the generation coming up behind me in a lot of different ways. And so, yeah, I think that's what comes to mind first when you ask that question.
If I could jump in there, I think that for me, North Carolina, how North Carolina factors into my writing is really a grounding, or even I would say more of like an ancestral homecoming in a way, like an ancestral return, because I have so many relatives and ancestors kind of all through the Carolinas and here, even here in Chapel Hill and Carrboro. Like I didn't know I had a very well-known cousin who was a pastor here. And so like, yeah, I think for me, it's kind of like that. And it is grounding, knowing that these are the spaces that my elders and ancestors kind of like inhabited, and that my roots, even though like, I was born in Philadelphia and spent all my most of my adult life in Washington, D.C., but even in that, right, D.C. is like, half of DC is like people from North Carolina and Southern Virginia and like South Carolina and points south, like if we just follow the migratory patterns. So yeah, like I think that is something that that's how North Carolina factors in, is kind of like to investigate my ancestry and my roots, and really to rediscover that, and to rediscover something else about the South other than what we were told, what people from, those of us from points further north are told about it, right? Yeah, I think all of that is in there for me.
And Jaki?
Yeah, when I think of this question and what does it mean for me, First of all, a great deal of my work is influenced, directed, informed, texturized by being inside of North Carolina. And as a child of this red clay, kind of growing up, knowing all the codes of all its stories, all its myths, its secrets, its lies, the myths, everything that whispers from the floorboards. So, you know, to grow up in this place, I've often thought about the texture of the red clay. And it's not just red clay, but the red clay itself has a life. It's a breath, it's vibrant. And when I think about what my experience has been as it relates to my creativity and living in the space, I think about whispers and incantations and prayers and secrets and something that I call genetic deja vu. And what does it mean to still be picking up and understanding the biology of objects, that what remains from our ancestors, those things seen and unseen. You know, CJ opened with, you know, ancestral memory, you know, all of the myths and all of those secrets that as Southerners, you know, not just North Carolina, but the South as a region, that all of us are continually, you know, peeling back, you know, raising up, looking under. You know, and we can talk about in terms of the context of that. I think that what's happening in the literary community, especially for many writers, not just writers of color, but I see a lot of writers of color who are really peeling back. I mean, we're just like peeling the bark off the trees. We're like looking under the rocks, and all of the things that were taboo, all of the things that barked at us in the dark, is that we're not afraid anymore to turn that over, because those are stories that must be told. And all of us, you know, folk, you know, born in this wellspring, the stories that people have carried in buckets, stories that people have carried to the fish pond, the stories that people carry in the backyard to throw out the slop jar, the stories, all of the stories that bring us to this moment, the stories that bring us to this moment, that there are 3 African-American poets of 3 major, of a state and 2 major North Carolina cities that are sitting here with you, African-American male, at a white institution. So we are the birth, you know, we are those fruits. This is us. We you know, we're the fruit. We're the seeds they planted that are now ripe. So yes, my work is very, very much influenced by the region, and especially by, you know, this red clay that inhabits Orange County.
Thank you so much for that. Let's stick with this for just a moment. All 3 of you have kind of touched on my next question in some ways, but let's stick with North Carolina for just a minute. There is a growing sense that over the last 6 years, we've seen the emergence of a new renaissance among Black artists. In North Carolina, we have to note the moment that of having all of you serve as poet laureate for your state, for the state or your town. What do you make of this, and what do you see your role in this renaissance?
I'm gonna
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I'm not sure that it's a renaissance at all. I think it's been going on. I just think that that we're in a moment right now where, like Ms. Jaki said, like we're just not going to be ignored anymore, right? And in addition to that, is that you ignore us at your own peril, right? Like the way that this country is what it is, and the way that our community is changing, the way that the state is changing, you have to be willing. You not even willing. You have to listen, right? Now, I mean, I think there's another kind of like layer to this. Like there's an argument that that the Black arts movement and the arts that came out of that never ended. And, you know, the scholars debate all of that. And I agree. I think that African Americans, Black people have been creating and doing this. It's just that now we know everyone's traditions. We know the Western canon, we know the American canon, and we know and have created, we know our own canon and are creating a canon as we are doing it. And so it's hard to ignore us now. Where if you look across the country right now, there are Black poet laureates popping up all over the place. Shout out to Crystal Wilkinson that just became the poet laureate of Kentucky, right? Like, and there's many more. I just shouted her out because I was just on Facebook and it popped up. But I'm not sure that it's a renaissance. I think it's a continuation, and we are exhibiting so much. So, I mean, we're just being who we are, but the excellence is hard to ignore at this point. So I'm not sure how my other panelists feel about that, but
Fred, that's so much true, Fred, because I've known Crystal for many, many years, and I remember reading with her a long time ago when she and I were the only people of color at a writing festival. And the thing is that, you know, we're contemporaries. The work that we have been doing for the past 40 years. There is absolutely nothing new that I am doing as the North Carolina Poet Laureate that I have not been doing for the past 40 some years. Absolutely nothing. So what we're talking about is who has the power to, you know, it's like, now we're good enough. Yeah, because part of this is political. Let's just like be real about this. You know, like right now, this has a lot of currency that it did not have 45 years ago. I don't believe that's the reason that I was appointed the poet laureate or any of us. But I will say that a lot of things that have nothing to do with us being here have affected why we're here, why we're sitting here. That has nothing to do with us, but the commerce of having us here, you know. The other side of that is technology, you know, has made it possible for us to validate each other in ways that we have never been able to do before. But I want to go back to thinking about, you know, you're talking about Lucille Clifton, and I remember the days when Lucille Clifton, Amiri Baraka, Mr. Sonia, Toni Morrison, these great people did not see themselves as celebrities. They were folk making art. And any young emerging writer coming along, their door was open. Their door was open. They were not gatekeepers. That whole revolution during the 70s of you know, the huge insurgence of the Black arts did not leave anybody out, did not have a measuring stick about who could come in and who could not come in. That's who we've become in this society. There are gatekeepers. There are circles that we still can't get in. But I'm saying this to say that for those of us, you know, I would call it a renaissance, but not in the way they're looking at the word renaissance, but a renaissance inside of us reclaiming our voices, us reclaiming spaces, us curating new spaces, creating the new spaces, creating a new sense of identities. You know, these spaces where we are now saying, we don't need a permission. Mm-hmm. We have granted ourselves literary permissions, because I keep asking the question, what is literary citizenship? You know, what does it truly mean to use your voice to serve humanity? What does it really mean to use our voices to build community across imaginary and real boundaries? But I think that in that sense, I see the emergence of many Black artists across the state. You know, for the first time, like every time I go online, I'm just smiling at all of these new names, these new artists that I'm discovering, musicians, sculptors, writers, dancers, you know, who are not asking for permission to permeate the landscape. And I think that's the Renaissance, is like granting ourselves the permissions to be here now.
Very well. CJ?
Yeah, I mean, I would just second everything that has been said all the way. You know, I think that, like, you know, with social media, with like technology and the internet, we as young folks get to decide, you know, who, like, how we want to show ourselves and present ourselves in the world, and it's not up to some other power being. If we got the friends and we got the people who want to share our content and all that sort of stuff, like, in many ways it creates a playing field where folks have to come to us in a way that didn't exist before this time. And so I think, you know, in the sort of etymology of the word renaissance or rebirth, right, I think it is like a time in which we are like birthing ourselves in a way that in a way that hasn't happened before. And so in that way, yes. And I would like, yeah, second everything that like Fred and Jaki has already said, because we've been out here doing it for a long time in this way.
Very well said from all three of you. In that I'm a musician, let's go that direction for a minute as far as working with other artists. What is the collaborative work between poets and musicians? More broadly, what is the collaborative work between poets and other artists?
I mean, I guess I'll jump in. Well, no, I started first. Somebody else go.
Well, I can speak to this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, for many, many, many years, I have been doing collaborations across, you know, cross genres of the arts. I just finished The River Speaks of Thirst, which is my first album, recorded LP. CJ is on the album. When I decided to do this, which was a big deal for me, I knew that certain poems, I did not want my voice to be the only voice on this album. But the album has been choreographed and it is now available as a film, The River Speaks of Thirst, directed by Dr. Christy Johnson at NCCU, dance professor, a huge lineup of musicians and speakers and actresses, actors, NCCU dance department. It was amazing. And then over the years, I can name at least 12 different dance companies from, you know, everybody from the Ballet City, Miami City Ballet to the Chuck Davis Theater, Chuck Davis Dance Ensemble, who've choreographed pieces of my work. Last year, the Chicago Arts Club commissioned a piece of work for me to write for Flutronics. I just finished a collaboration with Flutronics and the Harlem Youth Choir, which debuted this past weekend. So I, over the years, done a tremendous amount of collaboration with dancers, musicians, even way back with a sculptor. Done, you know, public art installations with other people, other musicians, I mean, with musicians and artists. And the most recent thing is the city of Asheville commissioned me a couple of years ago, and it's not done yet because we're still making it, but to do a piece of public art, which is a public art, a poem that will live on one of the river walks in an indigenous Black community. And I invited a group of Asheville youth to do a collaborative poem with me because I did not think it was appropriate for my voice to be the voice of that poem in Asheville, since I don't live there and I don't have roots there. But my voice mingled in with the voice of the youth who live around this river, around this branch. So yeah, and I'm always open for those opportunities to work with other artists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, I think my approach to writing is interdisciplinary from the start. Music, visual art, dance, like just interdisciplinary from the start. I don't think I'm unique in that way. I mean, I think poets are the quintessential interdisciplinary artist, right? Because we're taking experiences from all over the place, and then we're putting them on the page, or we're putting them in a presentation, right? In a dramatic like oral presentation. But more specifically for me, I worked a lot with photographers. Worked with a photographer from Northern Ireland during the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, and that kind of like carried me to Belfast, Northern Ireland for between 2007 and like 2012. I went there twice a year to do these kind of like photography and poetry workshops, doing peace and conflict resolution using photography and poetry. And then, I worked with an organization in Washington called the American Poetry Museum that presented poetry and visual art and musical performances. And that, being the curator of those kinds of experiences led me to quite a few other really cool projects that I've done over the years. Most recently, I have a catalog essay out with the Phillips Collection. They just put out their centennial exhibition and their centennial catalog. It's called Seeing Differently. And so I have an essay in there. And my father is a musician. So I've always thought of poetry as musical, as something that, like, to me, that's a given, right? To me, that's something I don't even feel like it's something that I have to state. Like, I just think it's part of what many, at least what I do or what I try to do. I've been really fortunate to collaborate with artists of various disciplines, mostly in the visual arts, visual and performing arts, musicians, and visual artists. It's always an amazing experience in community and listening, because no good collaboration can happen without real.
Yes. Before we go to CJ, I wanted to jump in here for just a second. Fred, you said your father is a musician. Were you ever drawn or inspired to maybe do an impromptu writing while he was performing? Have you ever?
Yeah, we actually performed together. Absolutely, okay. We performed together. I did a reading at a place called Grace Church. They had this reading series in Washington D.C. and Georgetown, and we did a thing together. I sent them the poems. It wasn't really impromptu. Like, I sent them the poems, mm-hmm. and then he, kind of came up with. He plays a trombone, mm-hmm. and so we kind of like did this reading together. I wish I had somebody has a recording of it. I wish I had it right now, but. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. I'd like to do, if my dad is listening, let's do this.
Hey, Dad. CJ, what about you?
Yeah, I believe in, for me, I think that the words aren't always enough for me. Sometimes I get, sometimes I don't want to be a poet. Like, it's the only way to know how to live. But sometimes it's just the words. I always have this sort of question in my mind, like, how much is this really doing? And I think that working with other artists really shows me the power of the word portion of things. I've collaborated with hip hop artists. I'm on a local artist from Durham's, G Yamazawa's album. I'm doing my if you're familiar with any Outkast work, I'm doing my best Big Rube impression. Mm-hmm. on that album. yeah, I've worked with a dancer who came here. I did a show at North Star Church of the Arts in Durham called East Africa Meets West Chapel Hill with a Ugandan dancer, contemporary dancer named Mugisha Frank, who came here and did a residency for about a week with me. Lots of musicians, and as well as visual artists. To me, again, like just being able to have the words come alive in a new way, because I feel like, not everybody wants to hear you just talk. People need that visual, and they need that melody, that need that music, that sculpture to make it like 4-dimensional. And yeah, so I believe in that. I believe in that collaborational work, if that's a word. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And thank you for those answers. I have so many paintings and sketches, I should say, where after I've done a performance, someone will come out of the audience and hand me a painting that's been done without my knowledge. They'll say, "You inspired this, take this home with you." Or months later, I would receive one of those. Or I've been on occasion fortunate enough to go work with an artist, a visual artist, sometimes a painter mainly, to present some music, play some music while they get inspired by the music and create a painting. So it's really cool to work collaboratively with other artists across other disciplines. I wanted to go to Caitlin right now, if we could, to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Todd. I think everyone's just been transfixed by the words tonight, and so captured. We've not seen anything come in through the chat or the Q&A, but this is definitely another call. If you have a question for our poets tonight, please do submit that. We'd love to get in maybe one or two. I know you guys have already given so much of your time and expertise tonight, and I think that really has come out with how engaged we've seen everyone respond to your stories and the images that you've painted with your poetry tonight.
If I could, I wanted to respond to something you said, Todd, because I think that too often, because of and this kind of goes to something that Ms. Jaki was saying too, is this idea of commerce, sometimes, because of the way that the literary world and the musical world have divided us up, we forget that the creative impulse is the creative impulse. When you get that spark, if you are a person that has musical inclinations or theater inclinations or literary inclinations, you're trying to figure out which medium you're going to use to express that thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's good for us to remember the creative impulse, poetry, big P, poetry can be exhibited in any kind of manner, whether that's music. There's the poetic quality in music. There's a poetic quality in architecture. There's a poetic quality in so many other disciplines. And so I think we kind of divide things up into these little kind of boxes, but the creative impulse is the creative impulse. That's the spark, right? That part of it, that part of the poetry thing, that is, I hate to use this word, but it's universal in that sense. It's just trying to find the right materials. And I think personally, that's what happened with me is as a kid, I used to paint and I tried to play music and I tried to do all these things. I was looking for my medium. And then poems, I read an anthology. My dad and mom had a lot of books. They had an anthology called I Am the Darker Brother. Langston Hughes, I think Langston Hughes edited that anthology. And I read I read some of those poems and I was like, okay, this is it. This is it. So, I think it's about the creative spark. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I just wanted to respond to that because I thought it was relevant to what you were saying.
Thank you. It was. Thank you so much. Caitlin, do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, if you'd like to go with that, Todd. We haven't seen anything come into the chat, but I just want to shout out that We have seen so many people say that these words have been so powerful tonight, and the complexities you guys have introduced with your poetry have just kind of left them sort of frozen and searching in the words. So again, I think people are just enthralled. So,
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. I just wanted to ask them before we go away about the future of poetry in our state. I think that would be a good way to wrap up. So, when you consider the community of poets in North Carolina, the three of you, what excites you about the future of poetry in our state?
Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I think artists have access to more tools than they ever have had before. And I think that happens as time goes on. And I think that picking up on that collaboration piece we just talked about, like the folks who are making art and able to make art and to collaborate with each other, just becomes much more available. I remember like years ago, I couldn't find a person to shoot a video for me. And now when I want to shoot it, I got more than like a handful of folks who want to shoot a video of me or for me, because the equipment is just so much more available than it once was, and affordable in some ways. And so I feel excited for that on a public level. And then I also just like, we as a generation, sort of as artists who have the titles that we do, are in many ways like broadening the spectrum of what art can be for a lot of folks. And I think folks being able to see us and other people who are coming to the fore, my dear creative partner, Monet Marshall, who does so much work in Durham, and other folks, are just like, I think those examples really are allowing people to dream big for what is possible in the context of arts and artistry here. As Ms. Jaki says, like uncover the rocks and take the bark off the trees and see what's behind that. So I feel really excited for art. I feel particularly excited for art connected to place, and artists really having a voice, envisioning their cities and what their cities should look like and towns should look like. And I think it's on us artists to share our visions. But I think in the seat where I sit right now, crossing the screen and where it lands, I feel like I also want to encourage folks out there who have access to the purse strings and things like that to continue to listen to artists, and will help to continue to make beautiful cities and beautiful spaces. But we need that listening, because we're going to keep creating. I think it's the only way we know how to live. So, yeah.
Thank you, CJ. Let's go to Fred next.
I'm excited because I just did a reading for my daughter's first grade class, and these kids were like, reciting poems and reading poems. Like I read a Shel Silverstein poem, and like 3 kids just ran and got their Shel Silverstein book and like just totally took over the reading, and it was cool. I was like, great, this is better than you listening to me. I want to listen to you, so I know who's behind me, who's going to take this tradition forward, right? So that's one part of it. Secondly, I think that I echo what CJ just said, that more people are seeing the opportunity and the realization that they can be creative and still be themselves and still make a living and work together, right? Work together to support each other in a community. And to that end, one of the things, I bring this up every time we're on a panel, like CJ and Miss Jaki will tell you, every time we're on a panel, I bring up ownership. Ownership is important. We mentioned spaces. I'm very interested in, obviously in Black artists, but I'm interested in artists.
Oh, I think Fred has frozen.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there he's back. Yes, you're back.
Okay. I'm interested in artists owning spaces, right? Ownership. Mm-hmm. It is essential to it's essential to our communities. Just let all the artists leave and see what happens to your community. Because we think of artists as people who write poems or paint pictures. I'm talking about graphic artists. I'm talking about, you know, the people who make your signs, the people who make your flyers, all those kinds of things. Let all those people go and see what your community looks like. So it's important, I think, for us to own our own spaces so that we can do and say what we need to do. And I think it's continuing in the tradition of trying to further the art, further the creativity. So I'm excited about those opportunities, looking at properties across the state to invest in and to become owners and to run our own art spaces outside of the institutions that have kept us, the gatekeeping at institutions that have kept us outside. Create our own.
Right, create your own. Thank you so much. Let's give the last word to Jaki Shelton Green.
Well, Fred and CJ have very eloquently expressed pretty much, I feel the same way. That's why the three of us are here together. But beyond that, I'm excited because I'm so happy that we can see the emergence of all of these new artists and art forms. You know, you talked about Monet, CJ, and like, there are people who literally are movements within themselves, you know, and I'm 68 years old, but I pay attention to, you know, like I teach documentary poetry and I will ask students, do you know this one? Do you know this one? They're like, how do you know these rappers? Like, because I study them. It's important that I know who they are.
Right.
And when they show up, I send them cards or letters. Just heard your new CD you dropped. It's important. That's my role as the elder, is to validate, is to show the road, to help move some of the pitfalls. They don't need to make the same mistakes I made. They don't need to even have to go through the same blundering, you know, just a mission of trying to validate yourself inside of a community, a larger community, literary community that has not always embraced me. But I don't need to make that same mistake. So my role, you know, as the Poet Laureate and going into a second term as the Poet Laureate of North Carolina is to continually think about what Fred is talking about. Some of these spaces already exist. A lot of it is naming. When I think of some community centers who've been doing this work for years, well, small community centers, you know, and isolated low wealth counties, they make art happen. They don't call it art. You know what I'm saying? They don't see it the way we see it, but they're creative makers. So how do we go around the state and how do we help validate and empower the stories of everybody? Because that's what we're talking about. But I feel good about the future because I feel good about people like CJ. Fred, you're a little bit younger than me. People like CJ, Fred, and so many other poets, musicians. Because Fred made a good point. We're all kind of a community. We're not just a community of poets. We're a community of artisans and creative makers and cultural activists. And I think that we don't talk about the fact that we're activists. All of us are cultural activists. You know, I've been thinking a lot today and every day about Ma'Khia Bryant, young sister. And what does art have to do with her life? This brother in Elizabeth City, whose family is grieving. What does art have to do with his life? So as a literary citizen, you know, like I'm like really pushing the envelope to talk about art, how it informs humanity, not just the sake of art. I could care less if I publish another book, if it's only going to be read by the canon. Our art needs to feed the people who need it. You know, poetry, all of this is medicine. It's good medicine. So we're in this position to be the distributors of this medicine, to help people to keep making the medicine. And when they get tired, to validate them, you know, because there's a generation coming and we have to show them the way. So I think we're in good shape. I think the state of North Carolina, Todd, in terms of the literary community, it's in good shape. Because something that's happening is the paradigm is shifting. And voices that have not been at the center are at the head of the line. and are singing loud. And when I say loud, I mean loud as in, they're on key. So this is where we are, and thank you for asking these questions.
So eloquently said from all three of you. The conversation this evening has been so engaging, and I've learned so much. I'm sure the audience has too. And on behalf of North Carolina Humanities, thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you to all of our attendees for attending this evening's event. A special thank you to CJ, Jackie, and Fred for your time and your words and your creativity in this space and at this time. And special thanks to Todd for moderating the conversation. If you are interested in North Carolina Humanities and want to learn more about our work, again, please go to www.nchumanities.org, and all attendees who registered with an email address will receive a short program survey after this event, and we would greatly appreciate if you all took the time to complete that. So thank you everyone so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.